you about my journey to England and how I ended up here. Originally, I'm from Trinidad, and in my early years I had a wonderful life over there. As a little girl, I loved art, craft, design, sewing, well, anything artistic really. I was a sporty young thing, running and cycling all the time, and I even managed to win my fair share of competitions. Why did I leave it all behind? Well, back in the early 60s, lots of people in the West Indies were migrating to England. So jumping on a huge cruiser-style boat and heading eastward seemed like a great idea. Thankfully, it was almost a direct journey, only stopping at one other West Indian island on the way. Seasickness didn't affect me like it did my fellow travellers. My first week in England was very memorable, and I'll never forget it. When I arrived, I went to stay with a family friend, greeted by a warm, friendly face in this grey, overcast land. Such a contrast to my beautiful, sunny Trinidad. I wanted to work right away, so I told my friend about my sewing skills, and she told me to inquire at a sewing place nearby. Well, it turned out it wasn't just any old sewing place. It was a high-end coat maker's just by Hackney Marshes. Hackney used to be the centre of the rag trade in London. I approached the grand old door and took a deep breath. Knock, knock, knock. The door squeaks as a very well-to-do gentleman answered it. "I'm here looking for a job," I said, rather hopefully. "Can you sew?" he barked, seeming confused. "Yes, sir. That's why I'm looking for a job in sewing." "You wouldn't be able to use the machines that we use here." "Well, what sort of machines are they?" I wasn't going to stop trying. "Mechanical, industrial, sewing machines." "Ah, I've used one of those at home in Trinidad." The man looked like he's seen a ghost. "Are you sure they have those where you come from?" I smiled. "Ah, but I owned one myself." His face was a picture. "Very well, you may come in for a trial." This was a trial like no other, and it went on for days. Day one was pocket flaps. Mastering the flap and repeating it over and over again, I finished them in less than no time. The gentleman, who I discovered was the workshop manager, nodded his approval at the pocket flaps. "Those are rather good." He invited me back the next day. But the trial was far from over. Day two was pockets. These were made using straight stitches. Pretty straightforward. On day three, I was given the front of the coat to sew the pocket onto. No problem. As each day went by, I felt quietly confident that my value could not be ignored. They had to take me on permanently. During the days that followed, I was given more and more complex tasks, and by the end of the week, I was making a whole coat from scratch. Everyone was shocked, as they never had a black person work there before. Life was very different back then. Finally, they offered me a full-time position, and I worked in it for many years. By the time I was ready to leave, I had a great reputation and was earning good money. I'm very proud of my accomplishments there. My story had been written. Over the years, I did meet a lot of discrimination, which is the darker side of the West Indian experience in England during the 60s. When somebody says something to me, and I know it's not right, I wouldn't answer back. That's how I get by in this country. It might not be the best way to stand up for your rights, but it's how my mother taught me to act, and I always remember it. When people come and they say horrible things to me that I know aren't right, and I turn the other cheek and walk away. There's strength in a peaceful reaction. In truth, I just wanted to get by without problems. Anything that took the focus away from my family, my friends, my job, I avoided. All that mattered was making the most of my time here in England. And as I look back now, I can see that's exactly what I did.
Fantastic.
Oh boy, the promised land of gold. Well, gold there certainly wasn't any. And the road had plenty potholes, let me tell you. When I arrived here in 1952, I come by plane. Yeah? The BOAC, the British Overseas Airways Corporation. We landed at the London airport, which all you know as Heathrow Airport, at 1 p.m. But me look outside and thought, aye, boy, what's going on here? It looked like nighttime. We never seen fog like it before. We had plenty sunshine in Barbados. And them never tell you that when they come do the interviews. I still remember the vegetation on my father's land. The mangoes, the coconut, the cassava, breadfruit, sugar cane. Yeah. Well, when we reached here, I already had a job and a house to live in. Them did that for you when you work on the London transport, you see. And I was a bus conductor. So that was easy for me. But life was no bunch of roses. So depending on the area you lived in, then people sometimes would have never seen a black person before. So that didn't make it easy for us. I remember people touching my ear just to check whether it was real. And one time, my lady friend from Glasgow, she invited me to visit. I was happy. But then she tells me, call me, and we come and collect you. Otherwise, people will knock you out thinking you're coming to rob them. Oh, Lord. I am a member of the Church of England from the colonial time. So I go to church, and the vicar says, we don't want you here. Go there round the corner. And that was a common thing. But since West Indian people could not just go to any club, we formed our own social group, WIFA, West Indian Community. We had house parties, and lots of people come down from far, from Leicester, to come to these parties. And people come and bring their drums. They'll be playing Caribbean music. There'll be lots of dancing, lots of food and thing. And boy, how can I forget the rum? Hey, that was the only way we could socialize with our own type of people. And another thing, back then you go to the bank and ask for money, they wouldn't give it to you. So what we do? Group of people come together and form partners. Susu. Who knows what it is? What it is? It is saving. It's like a collective. Like you put your money in a collective. So lots of people put money in a basket. Say 10 people over 10 weeks. And each week, one person will take £100. Simple. So lots of people bought their houses that way, that system, or pay for travel and things. Anyway, racism is everywhere. But it's only when you learn about the person's culture that you can bring those barriers down. Yeah? And us people work together as a community to overcome this and make a living no matter. Because boy, we had to make ourselves happy. Eh?
Gertrude, a story. Gertrude was born around 1930 and brought up in Grenada with her mum and dad. Her dad, James, was a musician, so only got a job on bank holidays. The island was a poor place, not a lot of money. But James was an industrious man and he grew nutmeg, cocoa and vegetables on their small farm. He always said to her as a child, "You have to get involved." The nutmeg was to be carefully removed from the shell whole and kept free of mildew while drying in order to fetch a better price. Dad would pick cocoa before school and cut it in half. Gertrude would have to be there to get the cream-coloured cocoa out of the pod. Then it would be put into large drawers. Dad would take a fig leaf to cover it and keep it warm, and it would ferment for 7 days to gain the darker, reddish colour that we recognise in cocoa and bitter chocolate. They'd leave it out to dry, and then Mr. Purcell would come and pick it up in his Land Rover. But they'd keep some for themselves. you have to patch or bake the cocoa, then grind or pound the cocoa, get it soft and roll it up into balls or like a cigarette. There was also sugar cane, soursop, breadfruit, moby, cinnamon and cloves. James also raised cattle and Mum raised pigs, and as a child, Gertrude would always get involved. You have to go first and sign on at Medina Road. That's the first place you have to go. The queue was so long. In those days, you don't have the right clothing. You come up here, you don't have a coat yet. In Grenada, the Queen is the mother country. When you hear the national anthem, you have to stand up and not move or it's disrespectful. Even if it's hot, something's biting you, if you move, all you will feel is the strap. You have to stand up straight. Here, people move about. No one seems to mind. Gertrude completed her nursing training here and worked at Paddington, among other places. But it was difficult when she got married and had children. This was still against the rules for nurses in these days. But she went back to work as an auxiliary nurse at Whittington for the last 25 years of her career. Gertrude's memories are rich with detail. Among the good and bad experiences, she feels she's in a better position now than she would have been had she stayed in Grenada. She has 5 children, all with decent jobs, and 5
sea travel, according to the Oxford Dictionary. Nowadays, we fly everywhere. But back in 1962, that wasn't an option for most of us. I want to tell you about a remarkable gentleman's voyage to and his start in England, Chris Maharaj. Where did this memorable journey start? In Trinidad. Chris had a good life. He had a family and 2 small children and a job as a car salesman. Why did he decide to go? He isn't sure, but his cousin had been here for 3 months and talked very enthusiastically about all the opportunities, especially for Chris's young daughters. Later, on reflection, Chris thought he had rather exaggerated. Anyway, restrictions were about to be imposed, so Chris dropped everything and decided to come in a hurry. He boarded an Italian ship, converted from either a cattle boat or a banana boat. For 5 days, they sailed round the islands, picking up different travellers. And Chris enjoyed exploring the boat. Then, in Jamaica, 1,000 people boarded. Crammed, it sailed across the Atlantic Ocean. It sailed non-stop for 18 days. And poor Chris, he was seasick for every single one of them. I'm sure that some of you have experienced seasickness. I see nods. Me, when I was 9, I was sick for 4 days as we sailed across the Indian Ocean in monsoon weather. I can wholeheartedly empathise with Chris, and I can't imagine an experience that went on for 18 days. The doctor advised, drink Coke and eat dry bread, but neither of those stayed down. When Chris looked in the mirror at Southampton docks, he saw a different person, grey and gaunt. He had been told to have £1 ready for the boat train to Waterloo. But when he disembarked, it was already dark. It was 9 p.m. The boat train had left, and he came down a rope ladder. Imagine negotiating that with a big suitcase. 3 of them re-embarked, much to the steward's dismay, who wanted to clear up. The next morning, after breakfast, a boiled egg and some bread. I'm sure that Chris was still very hungry after his 18 days ordeal. They set off. Chris was not met by Harry, who would be a welcoming face, but by someone who Chris very politely said had not been a best friend in Trinidad. They arrived at a small house in Leytonstone, and Chris was shown into a tiny room with only a bed base. A mattress materialised, but Chris admitted that he cried all night and wanted to go back home. The next morning, resilient and resolute, Chris was determined to find work. On Thursday, he scoured the employment pages of the Leytonstone Independent and Express. He walked and walked and walked, only to be greeted by, "Sorry, it's been filled." One time in frustration, he said, "If you were really sorry, you'd give me the job." Eventually, he ended up being handed an application form for a porter by Mrs. Hughes in a lino store. He waited anxiously for news in the post. Monday came. Once again, bitter disappointment. On Thursday, he determinedly went back to the same store as the same job had been advertised again. He told Mrs. Salmon, Mrs. Hughes was on holiday, perhaps in Australia, that he had a family and 2 small daughters and he had always worked. And he said, "If you are not going to give me the job, please will you tell me now?" The look in Mrs. Salmon's eyes made him optimistic. Chris started his working life behind the scenes, calculating lino coming in and marking down the lino that went out. A new manager arrived, Mr. Doland, Irish. Forgive me, I can't do an Irish accent. He said, looking at Chris's calculations, "What are you doing back here? You've got a brain." At last, talent and experience recognised, Chris came to the front of the store and became Mr. Dolan's goods received clerk. Chris moved resolutely forward. He had said to his wife that he would come back home if he couldn't send for them in a couple of years. A note on the bulletin board at work and the help from a friend enabled him to make a derelict house inhabitable, and he lived there for 3 years until it was demolished for redevelopment. Again, a visit to the bank manager, Mr. Hannon, for a loan, left Mr. Hannon so impressed that he phoned and got Chris £4,000 compensation. Chris put down a deposit on a house straight away and bought it outright. That was possible in those days. Chris is now established. His friends say he has a very positive attitude. He has worked hard all his life, losing his parents as a lad. "Hard work doesn't kill," is one of Chris's saying. His daughter said that he forgets all the hundreds of horrible people he has encountered, and says throughout his life he has received help from lots of English people. Let us salute Chris Maharaj, who turned an appalling voyage and a grim start into a fulfilling life.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.